In today's lesson, we are going to do some review of past topics. The first topic we're going to look at is multiplication. So if you see in example 1, I have a 3-digit number, 182, times a 2-digit number, 34. So to start with this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the longer of the two numbers, which would be the 182 since it has 3 digits, on top. And underneath that, I'm going to write the 34. And I'm going to line it up by putting my ones underneath my ones and my tens underneath my tens. So the way I'm going to start is I'm going to look at the digit in the bottom number in the ones place. And I'm going to start by multiplying through by the number in my ones place. So in this case it's a 4. I'm going to do my ones times my ones place, take that same 4 and multiply it by the tens place, or the 8. And then I'm going to finalize it by multiplying 4 times the 1 in the hundreds place, excuse me. So I'm going to start 4 times 2 is 8. Since it's a single digit number, I can just write down the 8. Then I'm going to go ahead and multiply the 4 by the number in the tens place, which is 8. So 4 times 8 is 32. Since 32 is a 2-digit number, I'm going to put the 2 down and carry the 3 above the 1. So now what I'll do is I'll take that 4 again, and I'll multiply it by the 1, which is 4. And then I'll take 4 times 1, which is 4, and add the 3 on. So 4 plus 3 is 7. Some people find it helpful to put a little plus 3 when you bring over a number like this, just so they remember that they have to add that on. Now, once you've taken that 4 and multiplied it by all of the digits above it, I like to cross it off. So I know that I am done multiplying through by that number. And then what I also like to do is cross off any numbers that I've brought over to the top. Since I have another digit in my bottom number, the 3 here, what I'm going to do is then go through and multiply by the 3. When I do that, I'm going to come down to a row right below the 728 I got previously, and I'm going to put a 0 for however many digits I've multiplied through by already. So I've multiplied through by the 4, which is one number, one digit. So I'm going to put 1 0 as a placeholder. I like to think of it as however many numbers I have crossed off up in the problem is how many zeros I'm going to put when I place save. So let's say there was another digit in the number here. When I'm done with this one, I would exit off, and when I come to the next row, I would have 2 zeros. So now that I've done my place saver 0, I'm going to multiply through in the same way with the 3. So I'm going to start by doing 3 times 2, which is 6, nothing to carry. 3 times 8 is 24, so I put the 4 down and carry over that 2. And then I do 3 times 1, which is 3, plus 2 more, which is 5. Now I'm done multiplying through by the digits in this number, so that means I'm done with my multiplication. 2-digit numbers being multiplied through should have 2 rows of work. Okay, and then I add together those 2 rows to get my final answer. Okay, looking at the next topic, it's division. You're going to see this slash written as division, so this just means divided by. Okay, so if you think about it, this is kind of like a sideways written fraction. So this is 195 over 3. And a fraction is actually just a division problem. So anytime you see this line, it means divided by. So it may be written like this, or it may be written like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up as a long division problem. I'm going to take the first number written and write it down. and I'm going to build that division house, as some people call it, around it. The 195 is my dividend, so it's what's being divided into, and what I'm dividing by is 13, which is my divisor. When I go to divide this, I have to divide by the 13. So the way I look at it is I start with 13 and I say, can 13 go into 1? No, it can't. Whatever I'm going into has to be 13 or more. So since it's not 13 or more, I go to the next digit and include that in my number. Can 13 go into 19? Yes, because 19 is 13 or more. So I'm going to see how many times 13 can go into 19. So 13 goes in one time. I'm going to put the 1 above the last digit of the number I'm going into up above. I then would do 13 times 1. Now some people may have used does McDonald's sell cheeseburgers to divide. So D is for divide, which we did the 19 divided by 13 to get the 1. Then we multiply, so 13 times 1 is 13. Then we subtract, so I'm going to do 19 minus 13, which is 6. At this point, the C stands for check. What you're going to check is if the number that you have subtracted before bringing anything down is less than your divisor. It should not be the same as or higher. If it is 13 or higher when you subtract, that means that the number you've put up top is too low and you need to go higher. But 6 is less than 13, so that means we're good to move on. So I'm now going to bring down my 5. That's what B stands for, bring down. Okay, so you just bring down the next digit in the number, and then you repeat the process. So now I'll do 13 into 65. If you're not sure how many times 13 goes into 65, you can pull to the side and try multiplying some numbers. So one thing that I'm seeing is that this ends in a 3 and this ends in a 5. So if I'm hoping that it's going to work out equally, I should be trying to find something that when I multiply by 3, it would end in a 5. So I know if I do 3 times 5, I get 15. So I'm going to pull to the side and try 13 times 5 to see what I get. So 3 times 5 is 15. That gets me that 5 that I was looking for. Bring over the 1. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. So this one worked out nicely. Goes in 5 times. 13 times 5 is 65. 65 minus 65 is 0. 0 is less than 13, and there's nothing left to bring down. So my quotient, or my answer to my division problem, is 15. Sometimes you may need to play with numbers to the side in order to divide correctly. If you get something that's higher than 65 in this case, you would lower this number. And if you get something that's lower than 65, you would want to try to move up a number and see if it gets you too high. Okay, so the next problem is asking us to put a fraction in simplest form. And again, this is a fraction. It's just written sideways with the way we have to write it in this program. So I'm going to rewrite it vertically. And in order to put a fraction in simplest form, you have to look at the numerator and denominator and see what common factors they have. So a factor is a number that goes into another number. So I'm looking to see what these can both be divided by. If you're not sure, look at one of the numbers and try and see if you can make it with multiplication. So for example, like I know looking at 49, that 49 is made from 7 times 7. Okay, so that means it can be divided by 7. So then I would think about 42 and think if 42 can be divided by 7, or if 7 times something will give me 42. And I know that 7 times 6 is 42. So what that means is I can divide both of these numbers by 7. 42 divided by 7 is 6, and 49 divided by 7 is 7. Looking at the fraction I got, 6 over 7, I have to look at the 6 and the 7 and see if there's anything that they can both be divided by. Well, I know to make 7, I can only do that with 7 times 1. 7 doesn't go into 6 because it is lower than it. So, in this case, the only factor these two numbers have in common is 1. So that means that this is in simplest form. I can't make those numbers any smaller through division of the same number. Okay, so the next problem is just a review of adding fractions. So I'm going to set this up vertically, so 1/3 plus 2/7. With fractions, when you add them, they must have a common denominator. So I have to think of a number that both 3 and 7 can go into and recreate these fractions with that as a denominator. The easiest way to do this is to take the two denominators and multiply them together. In this case, that's what we would have to do in order to find the least common multiple of these two numbers. So 3 times 7 is 21. So 21 would be my common denominator. It's a number that both of these denominators can go into. 3 times 7 is 21. 1 times 7 is 7. So 1/3 is the same thing as 7/21. On the bottom set of fractions, 7 times 3 is 21. So 2 times 3 is 6. Remember, whatever you do to the denominator in a fraction, you must also do to the numerator. So since I went 3 times 7 to get the 21, I have to do 1 times 7 to get my new numerator. Now that they have a common denominator, I'm going to keep that denominator as my denominator, and I'm going to add my numerators together. 7 plus 6 is 13, so this becomes 13/21. I would want to check to see if I can put this in simplest form. I know that 13 can only be divided by 13 and 1, which means it's a prime number. And I also know that 13 can't go into 21. So what that means is this fraction is in simplest form already. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is decimal place value. So if we look at this number and we just ignore everything that's after this decimal, so talking about just the number 17, hopefully we all remember that 7 is in the ones place and the 1 is in the tens place. Okay, so we've got our ones and our tens. Just attaching the decimal to that does not change this. This is still before a decimal, they're whole numbers, so it is the ones and the tens place. Now, I know some kids have some confusion with what comes after the decimal, so I'm going to show you a little trick that you can use. What I do is I put a 1 underneath the decimal point, and then for each digit underneath, if I need to know its place value, I attach a 0. So if I was looking for what place the 6 was in, I have my 1, it's right after it, so I'm going to put a 0. That writes the number 10. Anything after the decimal place has a THS on the end, so this is the tenths place. Don't forget that THS. If I'm looking to find which place the 9 is in, it's 2 after the decimal, so I would put 2 zeros. That creates the number 100. This is in the hundredths place, again with that THS on the end. If I'm looking for the 5's place value, it's 3 digits after the decimal, so I would put 3 zeros underneath. That creates the number 1000, so this is in the thousandths place. Don't forget the THS. If I'm looking for the place value of the 2, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 digits after the decimal. So 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros. That creates the number 10,000. So this is the 10,000ths place. Okay, so just a quick review of decimal place value. We will be revisiting this throughout the year, as well as some of those other concepts that we talked about today.